We are going live. And thank you for joining me again. For those of you who are joining me again, and also welcome to those of you who are joining me for the first time. My name is Melva Johnson, and I am doing a series. I'm a co founder of the Johnson Relationship Institute for Couples, and I'm on a mission to support couples to have the best relationship that they can have. Because I know what it looks like when the two of you are in sync together and you're moving together in sync toward the relationship and the marriage of your dreams. And so there are very specific things that could get in the way. And the things that can get in the way for me and for us over the years that we were together, we saw them as growth opportunities to bring out the best versions of ourselves. And when I say us, I'm talking about my beloved late husband, Jesse. And in our work together over all of these years, 4 decades, if I tell you the truth, is there's so many things that we learned about ourselves personally and that we learned about what we could do together as a couple that we shared with other couples over all of those years together. And one thing that I'm really, really clear about, excuse me, um, in terms of our company, when we first started off, our company was called Personal Transformations. Well, it's still the name of the company. Um, and that one of the best places for personal and spiritual growth is in love and marriage relationships, because love and marriage bring out the best version of who we are, as well as the parts of us that struggle. Excuse me. So some people describe that as the worst version. So that's one way of looking at it, but I don't look at it that way. See, I understand that beneath the surface of all behavior, there's two things going on. The first one I learned years ago when Jesse and I started doing this work together from um, our first trainer, who became our best friend, Sid Berkowitz, and that is beneath every behavior, there is a positive intent. Well, mostly, there is a positive intent. And I see that positive intent as an opportunity to grow the undeveloped or underdeveloped versions of ourselves. And that takes place when we get triggered by the person that we love. Now, we can get triggered also by the person um, at Whole Foods, the person who services our car, the person who is standing in line at the movies. We can get triggered by anyone. However, in a love and marriage relationship, those relationships give us an opportunity on an ongoing day to day basis to take a look at how we react in any given situation. And so, what I have learned is that what happens after a person gets triggered is the most important thing to take a look at first, because how a person responds has a lot to do with, it's a reflection of um, the whole picture of who they are in the moment. And that is the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so having an opportunity to take a look at ourselves reflected in how we function in our relationship is the perfect environment to grow and also to heal. And so the series focuses on a variety of ways that people get triggered. And the goal is to look at what to do differently. Because when we get triggered, we have tunnel vision. We go into survival mode and we have tunnel vision about staying safe and warding off the threat, with blind spots to other opportunities to dig deeper into understanding the bigger picture, and understanding the bigger picture about us and what's going on within us, and also to find out what's going on with the other person. Because whatever that is, I see it as an opportunity for healing and growth. So, started off the first segment was how do you react when your partner doesn't listen? And the second one focused on what do you do when you feel criticized? And last time we focused on what do you do when your partner ignores your boundaries? So, and I'm talking about the fight, flee, freeze, play dead, hide reaction. And those three segments that I did earlier, I presented case studies of couples who had an opportunity to look at options of responding differently in a more reflective and problem solving way. Because I see problems can either be dissolved by talking them through with understanding and empathy. If that doesn't work, then resolving the problem with some kind of behavior change. And if that doesn't work, to manage the problem. And usually, problems that have to be managed are problems that are out of any one partner's control. Okay, so this fourth segment, this case study is what happens when you have two different styles of dealing with finances. Excuse me. So, this case study is about a couple that I'm calling Charles and Carol. Now, if there's a couple out watching or listening named Charles and Carol, I'm not talking about you. I haven't met you. This is a prototype of a couple. So Charles is, let's call Charles a frugal saver. He's always looking forward to the future, while Carol is always looking for enjoying the pleasure of the moment. They have really good jobs, and so they make really good money. And so she says, well, why not enjoy it all? We don't have to sit on it forever and ever. Let's spend it. So while both of them are making good points, it becomes a source of conflict for the two of them because Charles is thinking about the retirement and what their life is going to look like and how they're going to finance their life in retirement. And Carol is saying, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. However, what happened to them when they were going over their finances well into their marriage, maybe 10 years into their marriage, they had accumulated a lot of debt. And so they had, Charles was livid and Carol was defensive. And so they argued about it over and over again. They did the blame game. Do you know of anybody who does that? When things go off track, they're blaming each other, or since they don't get it resolved, dissolved, or managed, then they argue about it over and over and over again. Do you know anybody like that? And or the arguments get so intense that it escalates. Now, sometimes it escalates into name calling. And for some couples, not this couple, but for some couples, it will escalate into physical attacks. And for some other couples, that physical attack, sometimes the police are involved. It really gets out of hand for some couples, but not for Carol and Charles. But after they have the arguments, since there's nothing is resolved, then they're left feeling emotionally drained. They're not thinking straight because it's difficult to think straight when you're flooded with emotions. And those arguments trigger an immense amount of intense emotions for the two of them. And physically, it's stressful. Physically, it's stressful. Does that make sense? Can you see that could happen to them? Has that ever happened to you, whether it's about finances or anything else? The stress becomes unbearable, and then it gets to the point that it does affect a person's physical health. So they knew that they couldn't keep going down this path. I'll call it the path. What is it that is it M. Scott Peck calls it the road most traveled? They got to the point where they said, we can't keep going down that path. We really can't keep going down this path. It is stressful for both of us. It is ruining the level of care that we have for each other, the level of love. It's like sometimes they don't even want to be around each other when they don't get over this issue. And the other part that is really difficult is that those negative feelings after the argument just simmer beneath the surface until the next argument, and then it explodes even more. And so they decided that they needed to make a change. And anybody who's having stressful arguments, conflict over money or anything else, then there needs to be a change. And before there's a change, there has to be a big why. There has to be a reason why a person and a couple wants to change. And so when Charles and Carol were in a calm space, they began to talk about it. Actually, they had the support of a facilitator who could help them to have the conversation to get clear on focusing on why they needed to have a change. So they came up with many reasons. Here's 3. They were sure that they didn't want their health to suffer. Now, Charles had high blood pressure, and Carol was suffering from anxiety. And so they were thinking that their ongoing conflict contributed to that. So that was one of their big whys. The other one was they decided that neither one of them were coming from a negative place. Remember what I said about positive intention? That beneath the surface of their arguments and their frustration is that both of them wanted to have a financially secure life. Carol thought that they could just have it spending the way that they were spending. Charles was sure that they could not. And so when they had an opportunity to talk about it and think about their big why, they were real clear about they wanted to have financial security now and in the future, and that they needed to have a conversation about how to do that. So that was reason number 2. Reason number 3 is that they were thinking our marriage won't survive if we keep arguing about this. Now, they had other issues, but this was the biggest issue that they were dealing with that kept coming up over and over again. And so they had their big why. And there's a change that needs to be made in your relationship. What are 3 reasons, at least one reason, why it is important for you to change and for your partner to change, so your relationship not only survives, but it thrives as well? Okay, so the big why. The second part that was important for them is to do something different. And again, they had support having the conversation about the positive change. So here's 3 things that they came up with. In talking about this issue and talking about any issue, they knew that they needed to change how they talked about it, how important it was to acknowledge that, well, they knew that the issue was a problem, but acknowledge how both of them were contributing to the problem, because they were focusing on the problem and not the solution. That was number 1. Number 2, it was real important for them to have a way to have the conversation in a way that they could talk to each other, in a way that the other could hear, because it's difficult to hear someone who is talking with finger pointing, blaming, and judgment. So they knew that they had to stop that in terms of how they talked to each other. And they also needed to change how they listened. They needed to listen with curiosity and listen in a way that the other person felt heard. They needed to listen to each other without interrupting. Now, how easy is that for you to do, to listen without interrupting your mate when they're saying something that you don't agree with, or you listen to them and you say, "No, that's wrong. You got it all wrong." How easy is it for you on a scale of 1 to 10 to be able to hear that other person when you're flooded with emotions and feelings, and what they're saying just does not make sense to you? Well, they discovered that they needed to do that. They needed to get to the place where they could talk in a way that the other could hear and listen in a way that the other felt heard. And then they needed to set goals, their financial goals. They had their individual goals, but they needed to establish joint goals, joint goals. And so they worked with it, and they learned how to have the conversations, and they began to work their plan because they knew that they had to bridge the gap from where they were, point A, where they were stuck, to point B, where they wanted to be. So they had a clear vision. They they had their big why. So now they had to bridge the gap from where they were to where they wanted to be. And that happens in all situations when couples are trying to work things through. And so when they started the process, here's what happened with them. When they started communicating, when they started having those conversations, when they were able to be really present with each other and hear each other out, they noticed that the way that they approached the conversations, that they became allies, that they were focusing on working through this issue together in partnership. They discovered that when they talked to each other without being critical and defensive, and listening with curiosity and compassion and understanding, that they were in a space to be present with each other to stay on track working their plan. And so it wasn't easy, but they stayed with it. It took time, but they were consistent. They were developing, they were working on the deeper awareness that they had about the bigger picture. I mean, they even got in touch with the bigger purpose of them being together as a couple. Yes, to love and support each other. Yes, to have a happily ever after. Yes, to be good parents to their children. Yes, to be successful in their job. Yes, and they had a bigger purpose than that. They got clear about why they became together as a purpose in the first place, and they began to live their purpose. So when you think about your relationship, when you think about what it would take for you, for the two of you, to have that conversation so you can stay present with each other, what comes up for you about what would be important for you to do? That's important. Um, Charles and Carol found the importance of that. So, for those of you who are watching this or listening, just know that whatever triggers you, whatever your partner does that pushes your button, that the first step is not to try to change them. The first step is to get into a space where you can find out what you need to change in terms of your reaction. Because if you're in fight, flee, freeze, play dead, or hide mode, then um, you're reacting from a place of frustration, hurt, or fear. And when people are frustrated, they become frustrating. When people are hurt, they become hurtful. When people are scared, they become scary. And so think about this. Maybe Carol and Charles's story can become your story. What would your new story look like? Whether you're dealing with finances, whether you're dealing with feeling criticized, what is it? Because that's not your story. That's a symptom of something that's off track. So think about the bigger picture and what it would be for you. And so here's the other thing I want to ask you. If you were giving advice to a couple like Charles and Carol, what advice would you give them? I would like to hear your thoughts. And you can share your thoughts either on this platform, whatever platform that you're watching this on, or listening to it. Because it's important to have a conversation about and share ideas about what works. Because all of us want long lasting, loving relationships. And all of us can take a step forward to become the best version of who we were intended to be. And our relationships can be the context and environment to do that. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. What do you think? If you are struggling with financial issues, I hope that Charles and Carol gave you some ideas. And if you would like to share the ideas that you came up with as a result of thinking about Charles and Carol, please let us know. Thank you for joining me again. I have a few more to share with you, and I will see you again very soon. Take care.